Good afternoon, parliamentary colleagues and members of the media. Thank you for coming this afternoon. Before the Minister of Finance has the opportunity to speak, I want to commend the Deputy Premier, the Honourable E.T. Bob Richards, for once again delivering a very responsible and prudent national budget. It has been a relatively comprehensive budget which outlined a broad global perspective in the terms of the risks and the threats that Bermuda faces. And as you've already heard, this year's budget demonstrates our continuing commitment of putting the right policies in place to address our current financial times, both locally and internationally. We are all well aware that Bermuda has in recent years been battling against a history of fiscal indiscipline that has the ability to define our financial future for generations to come. And because of this, one of our chief aims since becoming the government was to implement a very robust strategy that would help us wrestle back control of those public finances. Every government policy and national budget since that day has sought to manage our finances while at the same time maintaining our ability to provide vital services and programs to the people of Bermuda. I understand that for some, being fiscally prudent hasn't always been easy. However, over the past 4 years, Minister Richards has confidently and ably provided us with a successful strategy which he has sought to rationalize expenditure and still provide the services that our people demand and expect. I believe these years of prudence are showing results, and this year's budget is evidence of that. This is a budget for our current times. It is a budget that ensures that the people of Bermuda are in safe hands. I am encouraged about the programs and the initiatives that are contained in this year's budget, and all of them will benefit people at all levels. Budget 2017-2018 is a very wide-ranging and extensive one, and the ministers will be at the ready throughout the next week to discuss and expand on their respective budgets. However, today, it's Minister Richards' Day, and at this time, I am pleased to turn it over to the Deputy Premier and the Minister of Finance so that he can discuss this government's 2017-2018 national budget, and then I'm sure he'd be happy to take questions from members of the media. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Premier, colleagues, members of the media. I'm sure you may be relieved to hear that I'm not going to give another 2-hour speech. I don't think my voice could take it anyway. After these few remarks, I'll be happy to take questions. The national budget for 2017-18 moves Bermuda closer to our goal of having a balanced budget. Current account balance of $118 million is also able to cover 95% of interest payments due for this coming year. Projections for the next year, 2018-19, indicate that the current account surplus will cover interest charges and capital expenditures, meaning that for the first time in 15 years, the government will not be adding any new debt to its books. We'll start reducing debt at that point. But for now, this year, for the first time in Bermuda's history, our debt service charges will be the largest line item in the budget, bigger than any one of the expenditures that the ministers assembled here has, which is something that we have unfortunately predicted, and it has now become a reality. Overall, the fiscal 2017-18 budget, there will be a projection of an overall deficit of $135 million. And that really means that there will be $135 million more expenditures than revenues, meaning we'll have to borrow another $135 million to finance this year's budget. But this deficit is $64.4 million less than the deficit last year, which was about $200 million. So we're making annual progress to our goal of getting this deficit down to zero. This budget puts our net public debt at $2.398 billion, with projected debt service costs of $186 million. That means that it's claiming about 18 cents of every dollar of revenue, right off the top, goes to debt service. This government budget is one part of a multi-year plan to completely eliminate the deficit. And it's an important part of our plan for the long-term prosperity of the Bermudian people. To take that step, government is moving both to broaden the tax base and establish tax cuts to ease cost of living expenses on lower income earners. We're introducing fairness into the payroll tax system. So with that introduction of fairness, I talked quite a bit about that in the actual formal budget presentation. That tax has always been unfair, but we finally come to grips with it to try to get some fairness into the system where people who earn more will pay more, people who earn less will pay less, proportionately so. Now, I want to outline some of the highlights of this 2017-18 budget. There's a new tax, financial services tax on banks and local insurance companies and money service businesses. That new tax will be expected to generate an additional $11.4 million a year. Annual government fees for certain so-called permit companies, otherwise known as overseas companies. The fees for that will be increased substantially from $1,995 a year to $25,000 a year. And we expect to actually consummate some sales of government property this year to raise an additional $3 million. So just the final sort of bullet points of this budget, that there will be tax relief for those earning $96,000 or less. There will be more required from those earning more. There's increased funding for education. There's new money for needed roadworks. Land taxes will stay the same. The tax concessions to hotels, restaurants, and retailers will be eliminated. And of course, we have the obligatory increases in taxes on sin taxes, which is tobacco, alcohol, etc. And there will also be an additional tax on fuel. So with those few remarks, I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Minister, tell us more about the financial services tax. Isn't there a risk that that might drive the golden goose away?
The financial services tax is only on local companies. So it's on banks, local insurance companies, not exempted insurance companies. And of that local insurance set, we're exempting any local insurance premiums that relate to health insurance. So it's all non-health insurance, local company business, and money service companies.
And yet in your speech earlier today, you made a big point about we had some major problems with the tax haven label, and we've got to make recompense in some way, and someone has to pay for that. I thought that was where your international tax ideas are coming in.
No, I think you're conflating two separate things. We have financial services tax on local financial service providers, as I just mentioned, banks, local insurance companies, and basically money shops. We also have fees on what they call permit companies, which are companies incorporated in other countries that basically have a branch in Bermuda. Many of these companies are part of elaborate global tax arrangements for multinational corporations. And they're using these companies to shelter billions of dollars worth of taxes. We are getting heavily criticized in the international media for our involvement in that. And when I looked and saw how much the Treasury was actually getting for its trouble, it was clearly totally out of proportion. So we're trying to, we spent a lot of time and money defending Bermuda in the international press, particularly yours truly, and it's about time we got paid for it.
Sorry.
Any other questions? Jonathan?
Jonathan?
My colleagues back at the Gazette wanted to know a bit more about the reasoning for postponing the GST, the general sales tax, for another year.
There's nothing mysterious. We've spent the past year in consultation mainly with international business relative to payroll tax changes. So we're a year behind schedule because of that. Originally, we thought we could do this, could have this done by now, but we've spent the extra time and trouble, I might say, in very detailed discussions with our international business stakeholders. And so that has used up all of the past, quite frankly, year and a half. So we haven't got around to the general service tax, but now that we've got clarity on payroll tax, we'll be able to spend more time on the GST.
For the public, would you be able to sum up a bit more about what it actually is, what it does?
It's a tax on provision of services in Bermuda. It's like a sales tax, except it's not a sales tax on goods or a sales tax on services. We have yet to really define the scope of it and what exactly which companies will be affected and which companies won't be affected, and how it will be implemented in terms of reports to government, technology, all those sorts of things have to be sorted out. So we're still a long way from getting that done.
Siona, did you have one there as well?
Minister, could this be described as an election year budget?
No, it is an election year, and it is a budget in an election year. But this budget really conforms with the plan that I laid out a year ago. I would, if you really want to, if you have a bad case of insomnia, I would invite you to read last year's, right? And you will see that we kind of laid out what we've done this year. We laid it out last year. So as part of a 3-year plan, we said last year we'd make payroll tax progressive, i.e. lower income people pay less, higher income people pay more. Bigger companies will pay more, smaller companies will pay less. I think it's hard to argue with the principle in that, right? And we laid all that out last year. So this year we're just implementing it. So, people can put whatever spin they want on everything, but these things that we've done this year have been laid out for a couple of years for us to get to where we need to go.
Concerning the payroll deduction in the lower bracket, can you give an overview on how that affects certain industries like the construction industry that doesn't know how many hours they're working until they've worked them? So which percent category would they fall into as the year progresses?
Well, the Office of the Tax Commissioner right now has a calculator online of how you calculate this payroll tax, but it's not that different from the way land tax works. It's on a tiered system, and if your income goes from, if you're fortunate, if you're unfortunate and you make less than $48,000 last year, and this year you make $80,000, well, you'll get your $48,000 tax bill for that lower. So you get your break for the first 48, then the next, 12 or something, you'll get the next rate, and then if you go up to the next rate, you'll get the tier after that. It works just like that, and all employers are going to have to figure this out, right? It is going to be more complicated. We're going to try to simplify it insofar as the tax commission is concerned. We still want all this done online. The software to make this easy has been worked on for the past year and a half, because we knew 2 years ago we were going to do this. So they're very well advanced at the tax commission in terms of the software to be able to do this easily online.
Same way you mentioned you gave an outlook of this year's budget last year.
Right.
Can you give us an oversight of next year's budget?
Well, next year's budget, as I said, one always treads perilous ground when one tries to look too far into the future, particularly when it comes to budgets. But we're anticipating balancing the budget next year, right? Once we get to a position where we stop adding to the debt, which I explained in my remarks here, that's essentially a balanced budget. So we're looking to be able to, we're going to still have to make some changes to taxes, and we're hoping to be able to get there by broadening the taxes that we have. We're going to have to do what we have to do, because I've promised Bermuda that we're going to balance the budget the next fiscal year, and we're going to do what we have to do to get there.
Okay. Premier, do you have any closing words?
No, just, thanks, Neil. I'll just re-amplify what I said at the start of my comments, members of the media. Early next week, ministerial colleagues will set up times for press conferences so you can hear more detail about what's taking place in their portfolios and ask some questions. And then, of course, the economic debate next week, when the whole team will have an opportunity to speak. So there's a lot of information out there, and we look forward to laying it all out for you. So thank you, members of the media. Be safe, and appreciate your attention.